The scarf was gone before Elena Marsh even understood what had happened. One moment the soft gray wool was wrapped around her neck, keeping out the cold evening wind. The next moment, something huge and fast had brushed past her, and the scarf was gone with it. She stumbled back against the fence and pressed a hand to her throat, gasping, her heart slamming so hard she could hear it in her ears. A wolf, a massive gray wolf, bigger than any dog she had ever seen, was already vanishing into the tree line at the edge of the road, her scarf hanging from its jaws like a trophy. For a few seconds, Elena could not move. The street was empty. The last light of the sun was slipping behind the hills, and the shadows between the trees looked deeper than they should. She looked around for someone, anyone, who might have seen what just happened, but the road stayed silent except for the wind moving through the branches. She forced her legs to work and hurried the rest of the way home, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. Her small house sat at the very edge of town, closer to the forest than most people were comfortable with, but it was the only place she could afford after her grandmother passed. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. It took her a long moment to realize her hands were shaking. "It's just an animal," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her nerves. "Wolves take things, that's all." But even as she said it, something about the moment refused to sit right in her mind. The wolf had not attacked her. It had not growled or bared its teeth. It had moved with a strange, careful precision, taking only the scarf and nothing else, as if it had wanted that exact item and nothing more. She spent the rest of the evening trying to distract herself, lighting the small stove, boiling water for tea, sitting by the window with a blanket over her knees. But her eyes kept drifting to the tree line beyond her yard, half expecting to see two golden eyes staring back at her from the dark. They never came, not that night. The next morning she told herself it was nothing worth mentioning. She had chores to do, threads to sort, and a stack of orders waiting at her small shop in the town square. Elena made her living with her hands, stitching dresses, mending coats, and knitting scarves that people in town swore were the warmest in the region. It was steady work, if not exciting, and it let her live quietly, which was exactly how she liked it. She unlocked her shop just as the sun climbed over the rooftops, and within an hour, her first customer walked in. It was Nora Bell, a cheerful young woman who ran the bakery 2 doors down and always seemed to know everything happening in town before anyone else did. "Did you hear?" Nora asked, setting a small basket of bread on the counter as a trade for a repaired coat. "Old Mr. Fenwick lost a whole basket of laundry last night. Says a wolf took it right off the line." Elena's hands paused over the coat she was folding. "A wolf? That's what he's saying, and it's not the first time either. My cousin lost a blanket last month, said the same thing. Some huge gray wolf just snatched it and ran into the woods." Nora shrugged, clearly more entertained than worried. "Strange animal, if you ask me. Normal wolves want food, not blankets." Elena said nothing about her own encounter. She wasn't sure why, but something about it felt private, almost embarrassing, as if telling someone might make it more real than she wanted it to be. Still, the thought stayed with her through the day, tucked in the back of her mind like a splinter she couldn't quite remove. That evening, she decided to finish a bit of extra work before heading home, and by the time she stepped out of her shop, the sky had already turned a deep shade of orange, sliding quickly into blue. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and began the walk home, taking the same path she always did, past the old well, along the edge of the fields, and finally toward the tree line near her house. The wind picked up, rustling the branches above her, and Elena found herself walking a little faster than usual. She was almost at her gate when she heard it, a soft, deliberate rustle, coming from the bushes just off the path. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, and slowly turned her head toward the sound. There, half hidden in the shadows between 2 trees, stood the wolf. It was even larger than she remembered, its fur a deep silver gray that seemed to catch the last light of the evening. Its eyes, a striking shade of amber, were fixed directly on her, unblinking, intelligent in a way that made the hair on her arms stand up. Elena's mind screamed at her to run, but her feet stayed rooted to the ground. Something about the way the wolf looked at her didn't feel like a predator sizing up its next meal. It felt more like it was studying her, waiting for something. "What do you want?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. The wolf did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, it took one step forward, then another, until it was close enough that she could see the way its chest rose and fell with each breath. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give out entirely. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the wolf turned and darted into the trees, disappearing into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. Elena stood frozen for several seconds, staring at the spot where it had vanished. before finally forcing herself to move. She rushed the rest of the way home, locked every door and window, and sat awake long into the night with a single candle burning beside her, unable to shake the feeling that she had just been marked by something far beyond her understanding. She told herself it meant nothing. Wolves lived in these woods. It was simply an unlucky coincidence that she had crossed paths with the same one twice. But deep down, a small, quiet voice told her this was only the beginning. Miles away, deep within the thick forest that bordered the town, in a place where the trees grew taller and the air felt heavier with old magic, a massive stone lodge stood hidden among the pines. It was here that Cade Ashwood, ruler of the Ashwood Pack and known across the region as the Alpha King, kept himself apart from the world of ordinary people. He returned to his private chamber that night in human form, his dark hair damp from the run, his sharp eyes carrying a weight that few among his own pack ever dared to question. In his hand, he carried the gray scarf, still faintly warm from where it had rested against Elena's skin. He sat by the fire for a long time, simply holding the fabric, running his fingers over the soft wool. There was a scent woven into it, something faint but unmistakable, something that stirred a memory he had spent years trying to bury. A knock came at his door, firm but respectful. "Enter," Cade said, his voice low. An older man stepped inside, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes sharp despite his age. Walter Finch had served as an advisor to the Ashwood Pack for longer than Cade had been alive, and he was one of the few who could enter the Alpha King's private chamber without fear of punishment. "You went out again tonight," Walter said, his gaze immediately falling to the scarf in Cade's hands. "That is the fourth one this month." Cade did not answer right away. He simply stared into the fire, the flames casting shifting shadows across his face. "There is a woman in town," Cade said finally. "Her scent is unlike anything I have encountered in a very long time." Walter's expression grew careful, almost cautious. "Cade, you know what happens when a wolf becomes fixated on a scent that reminds him of loss. It rarely ends well." "I am not fixated," Cade said, though the words came out sharper than he intended. "Then explain why you have taken 4 scarves from 4 different households, all belonging to women who share nothing in common except living near the edge of town," Walter said. "You are searching for something, my king, and I fear you already know what it is." Cade's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Walter sighed and moved closer, lowering his voice. "It has been many years since we lost her. The pack is healed. You must allow yourself the same chance, rather than chasing echoes through the scent of strangers." "This is not an echo," Cade said quietly, his eyes finally lifting to meet Walter's. "This scent is real. It is here, now, in this town, and I do not intend to walk away from it without understanding why." Walter studied him for a long moment, clearly torn between concern and the loyalty he had sworn to his king many years ago. Finally he nodded once, though the worry in his eyes did not fade. "Then be careful," Walter said. "Whatever answers you find, they will not stay buried once you dig them up. And if this woman is truly connected to what you lost, the truth may cost more than either of you are prepared to pay." Cade said nothing, but as Walter left the chamber and the door closed behind him, the Alpha King remained by the fire long into the night, the scarf still clutched in his hand, the scent guiding his thoughts back to a memory he had spent years trying to escape. Back in town, Elena finally managed to fall into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with golden eyes and silver fur, and a strange, unshakable feeling that something in her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. She woke the next morning with a heavy feeling in her chest, the kind that comes after a dream you cannot quite remember but know was important. She dismissed it as nerves from the encounter the night before, dressed quickly, and made her way to her shop, determined to bury herself in work until the strange unease passed. But as she unlocked her front door and stepped inside, she noticed something sitting neatly folded on her counter that had not been there when she left the previous evening. It was a scarf. Not her own, but a different one entirely, made of a thick, expensive blue wool she had never seen before in the small-town market. Beside it lay a single silver coin, more valuable than anything she typically earned in a week. Elena stared at the scarf for a long time, her mind racing through every possible explanation, none of which made any sense at all. Someone, or something, had been inside her shop. And whoever it was clearly wanted her to know they had been there. Elena did not touch the blue scarf right away. She stood behind her counter, staring at it as though it might move on its own, her mind spinning through every possible explanation. A gift from a customer made no sense. None of her regulars had that kind of money, and none of them would have left a silver coin behind without a word of explanation. She finally reached out and picked up the scarf, running her fingers over the fabric. It was finely woven, far beyond anything sold in the town market, the kind of material that came from distant cities or, perhaps, from somewhere deep within the forest where the old packs were rumored to live in hidden luxury. The thought made her shiver. She wrapped the scarf carefully and placed it beneath her counter, along with the coin, deciding she would think about it later once her nerves had settled. But the strange feeling followed her through the entire day, distracting her from her work more than she wanted to admit. By midday, Nora arrived with more news, as she always seemed to. "You will not believe what happened to the Hensley family," Nora said, leaning against the counter with wide eyes. "Their whole clothesline was stripped bare last night. Every last piece of laundry, gone. And get this, old Mr. Fenwick says he saw the wolf clear as day this time, standing right at the edge of his yard, just watching the house before it ran off." "Watching?" Elena repeated, her stomach tightening. "That's what he said, like it was thinking about something." Nora shook her head. "People are starting to talk about it being more than just an animal. Some folks think it might belong to the Ashwood pack." Elena's chest tightened at the mention of the name. She had heard of the Ashwood pack before, the way most people in town had, in hushed conversations and half-serious warnings from parents to children who wandered too close to the forest. They were said to be an old and powerful pack, ruled by an alpha king who had not been seen by ordinary people in years. "Do you believe that?" Elena asked carefully. Nora shrugged. "I don't know what to believe. But strange things happen near that forest, always have. My grandmother used to say the pack keeps to themselves as long as no one bothers them. Maybe someone did something to upset them." Elena said nothing, though her mind raced back to the golden eyes that had studied her so intently the night before. If the wolf truly belonged to a powerful pack, then whatever was happening to her was far bigger than a stray animal with strange habits. That night, against her better judgment, Elena decided she would not simply wait for the wolf to return. She would try to understand what was happening, even if it meant putting herself at some risk. She finished her shop work earlier than usual, wrapped herself in a warm coat, and instead of heading straight home, she took a slight detour toward the edge of the forest where the wolf had first taken her scarf. The sun was still up, though sinking quickly, and she reasoned that if she stayed near the tree line but did not go too deep, she might catch a glimpse of something that would help her make sense of everything. She found a spot near a large boulder, close enough to see into the trees but far enough that she could run if she needed to. She sat down and waited, watching the shadows lengthen as the sun dipped lower. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The forest remained quiet, except for the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. Elena began to wonder if she had wasted her evening on nothing more than her own imagination. Then, just as the last light began to fade, she heard it. A soft rustle among the leaves, followed by the quiet crunch of paws against fallen branches. The wolf emerged from the trees slowly, as if it already knew she was waiting. Its amber eyes locked onto hers immediately, and this time, it did not hesitate before approaching. It walked closer than it had the previous night, stopping only a few feet away, close enough that Elena could see the way its fur shifted in the evening breeze. "You left the scarf and the coin," she said quietly, testing whether the animal understood her at all. "Was that you?" The wolf tilted its head slightly, its ears turning toward her voice, but it gave no clearer answer than that. "I don't know what you want from me," Elena continued, her voice steadier than she expected. "But I would like to understand. If you keep coming here, there must be a reason." The wolf took another step closer, and for a brief moment, Elena felt no fear at all, only a strange, quiet curiosity, as though some part of her recognized something familiar in the animal's gaze. Then, without warning, the wolf's ears pricked up sharply, and it turned its head toward the deeper part of the forest, clearly sensing something Elena could not. A low, warning sound rumbled in its chest, and within seconds, it turned and vanished back into the trees, leaving Elena alone once more. She sat there for a long moment, confused and a little disappointed, before deciding it was time to head home before the last of the daylight disappeared entirely. As she made her way back toward the road, she noticed the shadows within the trees seemed to be moving in a way that did not feel natural. She quickened her pace, her earlier curiosity replaced by a growing sense of unease. By the time she reached her house, her hands were trembling slightly. Though whether from the cold or the strange evening she had just experienced, she could not be certain. Deep in the forest, Cade had sensed the disturbance almost as quickly as his wolf form had. Another presence had entered the edge of his territory, one that did not belong to any of his own pack members. He shifted swiftly and moved through the trees with practiced silence, following the unfamiliar scent until he found its source. A lone wolf, younger and leaner than his own massive form, stood at the edge of a small clearing, clearly having been watching the same spot where Elena had been sitting only minutes earlier. "You are far from your territory," Cade said, his voice carrying the authority that came naturally to him as ruler of the Ashwood pack. The younger wolf shifted into his human form, revealing a lean man with sharp features and a calculating expression. "Alpha King," the man said, offering a shallow bow that carried more mockery than respect. "I did not expect to find you wandering so close to the town's edge, watching over some human woman." "You are trespassing, Victor," Cade said, his tone flat and cold. "State your purpose, or leave before I lose what little patience I have left." Victor Lang smiled thinly. Alpha Cole simply wished to know why the great Ashwood King has been spending so much time near a seamstress's shop. Word travels quickly, even among rival packs. Cade's expression darkened. "Tell Damon that my business is my own, and it does not concern him or his pack." "Perhaps not yet," Victor said, taking a slow step back. "But you know as well as I do that weakness invites challenge. A king distracted by human sense is a king vulnerable to those willing to take advantage of it." Before Cade could respond, Victor shifted back into his wolf form and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Cade alone, with a growing sense of unease settling over him. He returned to his lodge that night with his thoughts heavier than before. It was one thing to chase the memory of a scent that reminded him of a painful past, but it was another entirely to have his rival, Damon Cole, aware of his growing fixation. Damon had wanted control of Ashwood territory for years, and any sign of weakness in Cade's leadership would be seen as an opportunity too tempting to ignore. Still, even with the warning fresh in his mind, Cade could not bring himself to stop what had already begun. The scent that clung to Elena's scarves carried something he had spent years searching for without success, a connection to a memory buried deep beneath years of grief and duty. He sat by the fire once more that night, the blue scarf he had left for Elena weighing on his mind almost as much as the silver-gray one he had taken from her days earlier. He wondered if she had understood the gesture, or if it had only added to her fear and confusion. Either way, he knew he could not turn back now. The following morning, Elena arrived at her shop to find yet another item waiting on her counter. This time, it was not a scarf, but a small, carefully carved wooden box, its surface polished smooth and etched with a design of intertwining leaves. Inside the box lay a single note, written in careful, elegant handwriting. The note contained only a few words, but they were enough to send a fresh wave of nervous energy through her entire body. "I mean you no harm. I only wish to understand why your scent feels like something I lost long ago." Elena read the note 3 times before setting it down with trembling hands. Whatever strange force had entered her life clearly had no intention of leaving quietly, and for the first time since the encounters began, she found herself wondering not just what the wolf wanted, but who exactly stood behind those golden eyes when it returned to human form. The note stayed folded inside Elena's apron pocket for the rest of the day, its edges growing soft from how often she touched it, as though checking it was still real. She read it so many times the words had etched themselves into her memory. Whoever had left it clearly knew more about what was happening than she did, and that unsettled her more than the scarf thefts ever had. By afternoon, a stranger walked into her shop. He was tall, with dark hair that fell just above sharp, striking eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people in the room straighten without realizing why. He wore a long gray coat, finely made, the sort of clothing that suggested wealth without announcing it loudly. Elena had never seen him in town before, and something about the way he studied her, calm and unreadable, sent a small ripple of unease through her chest. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep and even. "I am told you make the finest scarves in this town." Elena straightened behind her counter, forcing her expression into something professional, despite the strange flutter in her stomach. "That depends on who you ask. What can I help you with?" "I am interested in a custom order," the man said, stepping closer to examine the shelves lined with folded fabrics and finished garments. "Something warm, well-made, meant to last through harsh winters." "I can certainly help with that," Elena said, reaching for her notebook to record measurements and preferences, grateful for something practical to focus on. "Do you have a particular color in mind?" "Gray," he said, his eyes flicking briefly toward her, as though the answer held more meaning than the simple word suggested. "A deep, silver gray, if you have it." Elena's hand paused over her notebook. It was an odd coincidence, though she told herself it meant nothing. Gray was a common enough color after all. "I have plenty of wool in that shade," she said, keeping her voice steady. "May I ask your name, for the order?" "Cade," he said simply, offering nothing further. "Just Cade?" A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "For now, that will do." Elena studied him for a long moment, unable to shake the feeling that there was far more beneath his calm exterior than he was letting on. Something about his presence felt oddly familiar, though she could not place why, and the intensity in his gaze reminded her uncomfortably of the wolf that had been haunting her evenings. "Very well," she said, jotting down the details of his request. "I will need a few days to complete something of quality. You are welcome to return once it is finished." "I look forward to it," Cade said, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary before he turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back toward her with an expression she could not quite read. "Might I ask," he said carefully, "have you noticed anything unusual lately, perhaps near the edge of the forest?" Elena's breath caught slightly at the question, though she forced herself to remain composed. "Why do you ask?" "There have been reports of a wolf in the area," Cade said, his tone deliberately casual. "I only wish to ensure you are safe." "I have heard the stories," Elena said carefully, choosing her words with just as much caution as he had chosen his. "Though I cannot say I have experienced anything myself worth mentioning." Cade studied her for a long moment, as if searching for something hidden behind her carefully composed expression, before finally nodding once. "Be careful, all the same," he said, before stepping out into the street and disappearing among the passing crowd. Elena stood behind her counter for several minutes after he left, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. There had been something about the way he asked his question, the deliberate weight behind his words, that made her certain he already knew far more than he was letting on. That evening, she completed the beginnings of his scarf, working late into the night by candlelight, her mind circling back again and again to his piercing gaze and the strange coincidence of his chosen color. Meanwhile, in the depths of the forest, Cade returned to his lodge with his thoughts more tangled than they had been in years. Meeting Elena in human form had confirmed what his wolf senses had already suspected. Her scent, up close and without the barrier of fabric between them, carried an unmistakable trace of something achingly familiar, a memory he had buried so deep he rarely allowed himself to touch it even in solitude. Walter found him standing at the window of his chamber, staring out at the darkened tree line without truly seeing it. "You met her," Walter said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. "I did," Cade admitted quietly. "And what did you learn?" Cade was silent for a long moment before answering. "Her scent is stronger in human form than through the scarves alone. It carries the same warmth, the same undertone I remember from years ago. I do not believe this is coincidence." Walter's expression grew troubled. "You believe she is connected to Leora?" The name hung heavily in the room, and Cade's jaw tightened at the sound of it, even after all these years. "I do not know what to believe," he said finally, "but I intend to find out, regardless of what it costs me." Walter studied his king carefully before speaking again, his voice gentler than before. "Be careful how you pursue this truth, Cade. If this woman carries a connection to your sister, the manner in which you approach her will matter greatly. Fear driven by confusion rarely leads anywhere good." Cade said nothing, though the weight of Walter's words settled heavily over him as he turned back toward the fire. His thoughts split between duty, grief, and the growing pull he felt toward a woman who had no idea just how deeply she had already changed the course of his life. The following days passed with an uneasy calm. Elena worked diligently on Cade's scarf, finishing the fine gray wool with careful, precise stitching, though her thoughts wandered constantly to the strange stranger and his piercing question about the forest. She had not seen the wolf since their last encounter, and though part of her felt a quiet relief at the reprieve, another part of her found herself oddly disappointed, as if something important had been left unfinished between them. On the third day, Cade returned to collect his order. He arrived just as the sun began its descent, the golden light catching the sharp angles of his face as he stepped inside her shop. Elena presented the finished scarf, watching carefully for his reaction as he ran his fingers over the fabric. "This is excellent work," he said, his voice quieter than before, almost reverent. "Better than I expected." "I am glad it meets your standards," Elena said, allowing herself a small measure of pride despite her lingering unease around him. Cade lifted his gaze to meet hers, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered behind his usually composed expression. "May I ask you something personal?" Elena hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. "You may ask. I cannot promise I will answer." "Do you know anything of your family history?" Cade asked carefully. "Your grandmother, perhaps, or where your family originated before settling in this town?" The question struck Elena as strange, though something about the seriousness in his eyes kept her from dismissing it outright. "My grandmother raised me after my parents passed," she said slowly. "She never spoke much of where our family came from before." "Why do you ask?" Cade studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. No particular reason, he said finally, though the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. Simple curiosity. Elena did not believe him, though she chose not to press further, sensing that whatever lay beneath his question was not something he was ready to share. He paid for the scarf, thanked her for her work, and left without further explanation, leaving Elena standing behind her counter with more questions than she had before his visit. That night, as she walked home along the familiar path near the forest's edge, she found herself glancing toward the trees more often than usual, half hoping, half fearing, that she might catch sight of golden eyes watching her from the shadows once again. She was not disappointed. The wolf appeared just as she reached her gate, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching her with the same quiet intensity she remembered. This time, however, something about its posture seemed different, almost hesitant, as though it were waging some internal battle she could not begin to understand. "I met a man today," Elena said softly, unsure why she felt compelled to speak to the animal at all. "His name was Cade. He asked strange questions about my family." The wolf's ears pricked forward at the name, and for a brief moment, its amber eyes seemed to hold something achingly close to sorrow. "Do you know him?" Elena asked quietly. The wolf held her gaze a moment longer before turning and disappearing into the darkness, leaving Elena more certain than ever that the mysterious man and the wolf that had haunted her nights were connected in ways she was only beginning to understand. Elena barely slept that night, her mind turning over the wolf's reaction to Cade's name again and again until the sky outside her window began to lighten with early dawn. By the time she rose for the day, she had made a decision. If answers existed anywhere in this town, they would be found with the people who had lived here the longest, the ones who remembered stories most others had long forgotten. She thought immediately of Walter Finch, an old man who occasionally visited town for supplies and was known to have deep knowledge of the forest and the packs that lived within it. Few people spoke with him directly, mostly out of quiet respect mixed with a touch of fear, but Elena had exchanged pleasant words with him before, back when her grandmother was still alive, and would invite him for tea whenever he passed through. She found him near the edge of the market later that morning, examining a stall of dried herbs with the careful attention of someone used to selecting quality over convenience. "Mr. Finch," Elena said, approaching carefully, "I wonder if I might trouble you with a few questions." Walter turned toward her, his sharp eyes studying her with more interest than she expected. "Elena Marsh," he said, a note of familiarity in his voice. "Your grandmother spoke of you often. How may I help you?" Elena hesitated, unsure exactly how to phrase what she wanted to ask, without sounding as though she had lost her senses entirely. "I have been having strange encounters," she said carefully, "with a wolf, near the edge of the forest, and more recently, with a man named Cade who asked odd questions about my family history." Walter's expression shifted immediately, the casual warmth replaced by something far more guarded. "Cade Ashwood," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You know him?" "I know of him," Walter said carefully. "He is not a man most in this town have the privilege, or the misfortune, of meeting directly." "Please," Elena said, sensing his hesitation, "I need to understand what is happening. Why would he ask about my family? Why does the wolf seem to react so strongly to his name?" Walter studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing how much he was willing to share. Finally, he sighed and gestured toward a quiet bench near the edge of the market, away from the bustling crowd. "Many years ago," Walter began once they were seated, "the Ashwood pack suffered a great loss. Cade's younger sister, a woman gifted with rare abilities even among wolves, was taken from this world under circumstances the pack still does not speak of openly." Elena's chest tightened at the mention of a sister. "What kind of abilities?" "She carried a sensitivity to scent unlike anything seen before or since," Walter said. "It allowed her to sense danger long before it arrived, to calm troubled minds, to bind wounds that should not have healed as quickly as they did. The pack relied on her greatly, and her loss left a wound that has never fully closed." "And you believe I am connected to her somehow?" Walter's gaze grew distant, as though recalling memories from long ago. "Your grandmother," he said slowly, "was not originally from this town. She arrived many years back, carrying very little, and settled here quietly, raising her family without ever speaking of where she came from before." Elena felt a chill settle over her. "Are you suggesting my grandmother had some connection to the Ashwood pack?" "I am suggesting nothing definitively," Walter said carefully. "But scent carries memory in ways ordinary people cannot understand. If Cade recognizes something familiar within you, it is not something easily dismissed as coincidence." Elena sat in silence for several long moments, trying to absorb everything Walter had shared. The pieces of her life she had always accepted without question, her grandmother's quiet nature, the absence of any extended family, the strange sense of otherness she had always felt without understanding why, suddenly seemed to carry weight she had never considered before. "What happened to her?" Elena asked quietly. "Cade's sister?" Walter's expression grew heavy with old sorrow. "That is not my story to tell," he said gently. "If the truth is meant to be revealed to you, it should come from Cade himself. I have already shared more than perhaps I should." Elena wanted to press further, but something in Walter's tone told her this was as far as he intended to go. She thanked him for his time, her mind swirling with questions that had only multiplied rather than found resolution. As she walked back toward her shop, she noticed a commotion near the town square. A small crowd gathered around the notice board where important announcements were typically posted. Curious, she made her way closer, catching fragments of conversation among the gathered townspeople. "Another pack has been spotted near the eastern boundary," one man was saying. "Larger numbers than usual. Some say they're testing the Ashwood territory. If the packs start fighting amongst themselves," a woman added nervously, "it won't stay contained to the forest. We could all be caught in the middle of it." Elena's stomach twisted with unease. Whatever tension existed between the packs, it seemed her own strange connection to the Ashwood family had emerged at a particularly dangerous moment. That evening, as she closed her shop and began her walk home, she found herself more alert than usual, watching the shadows with careful attention. She had barely reached the edge of the forest path when a figure stepped out from among the trees, and her heart leapt into her throat before she recognized the sharp, familiar features. It was Cade, in his human form, his expression more serious than she had seen it before. "You spoke with Walter Finch today," he said, without preamble. Elena straightened, refusing to let herself feel intimidated, despite the intensity radiating from him. "I did. I wanted answers, and you have given me nothing but questions since we met." Cade's jaw tightened, though he did not deny her accusation. "There are things I am not yet ready to share," he admitted quietly. "Not until I understand them fully myself." "That is not good enough," Elena said, her voice firmer than she expected. "You have taken my scarves, left strange gifts on my counter, asked questions about my family, and now I hear rumors of packs preparing for conflict. I deserve to know what role I am meant to play in all of this." Cade studied her for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind his sharp gaze. "You are not meant to play any role," he said finally. "This is not something I intended to draw you into." "Then why does it feel as though I already have been?" Elena challenged. For a moment, Cade said nothing, the weight of her question settling heavily in the space between them. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, more intimate than before. "Because your scent carries a memory I have spent years trying to forget," he said quietly. "And because some part of me cannot stop searching for answers, even when I know the search may only bring pain to us both." Elena's breath caught at the raw honesty in his words, though her mind still spun with unanswered questions. "What memory?" she asked softly. Cade's expression grew distant, pained, as though the answer cost him more than he was willing to admit. "Not tonight," he said finally. "But soon, I promise you that." Before Elena could respond, a sharp howl echoed from somewhere deep within the forest, distant but unmistakably urgent. Cade's entire demeanor shifted instantly, his sharp eyes narrowing toward the sound. "Go home," he said firmly. "Lock your doors, and do not venture near the forest until I come to you again." "What is happening?" Elena asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "Trouble I must attend to," Cade said, already stepping back toward the tree line. "Please, Elena, trust me on this, if nothing else." Before she could argue further, he shifted swiftly into his wolf form and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her standing alone at the edge of the path, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else entirely, something she was not yet ready to name. Elena did not sleep well that night, replaying the sound of that distant howl over and over in her mind, along with the urgency in Cade's voice as he had rushed away from her. She spent the following days in a strange state of waiting, her attention divided between the steady rhythm of her shop work and the constant awareness of the forest looming just beyond the edge of town. Nora noticed the change in her almost immediately. "You seem distracted," Nora said one afternoon, watching Elena struggle to thread a needle she had already threaded twice before. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," Elena said, forcing a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Nora studied her for a moment longer before letting the matter drop, though her expression suggested she was not entirely convinced. Word around town had grown more tense in the days since the rumored sighting of a rival pack near the eastern boundary. People spoke in hushed, worried tones about what conflict between the packs might mean for those living close to the forest's edge. Some families had even begun discussing whether it might be safer to move further into town, away from the tree line entirely. Despite the uncertainty, Cade returned to Elena's shop 3 days later, his expression carrying the weight of exhaustion, though his composure remained as steady as ever. "You are safe," he said, relief evident in his voice, the moment he saw her standing behind the counter, unharmed. "I am," Elena confirmed, setting down her work, "though I would appreciate knowing what kept you away, and what that howl meant the other night." Cade hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "A rival pack has been testing the boundaries of my territory," he admitted finally. "Their leader, Damon Cole, has grown bold in recent months, believing my attention has been divided by matters he considers weaknesses." Elena's stomach tightened at the mention of a name she had heard whispered nervously around town. "Am I one of those weaknesses?" Cade's gaze softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders did not fully ease. "You are not a weakness," he said quietly, "but my growing attachment to finding answers about you has not gone unnoticed by those who wish to see me falter." "Then perhaps you should stop coming here," Elena said, though the words felt heavier leaving her mouth than she expected. "If my presence puts you at risk." "I considered that," Cade admitted, "but I find myself unable to stay away, regardless of the danger it might invite." The honesty in his words settled somewhere deep in Elena's chest, stirring feelings she had spent days trying to convince herself she did not have. Despite every reason for caution, she found herself drawn to him in a way she could not fully explain, as though some invisible thread connected them beyond simple curiosity or fear. Over the following weeks, Cade's visits became more frequent, though always carefully timed to avoid drawing unwanted attention from the rest of town. He would arrive under the pretense of commissioning new items, though their conversations gradually shifted away from business entirely, drifting instead toward quieter, more personal exchanges. Elena learned that Cade carried the full weight of his pack's well-being on his shoulders, a responsibility he had inherited far younger than most, following a loss that had reshaped his entire family. She sensed the careful way he guarded his emotions, allowing only small glimpses of vulnerability to surface during their conversations, as though years of leadership had taught him to keep his true feelings locked safely away. In turn, she found herself sharing pieces of her own life she rarely spoke of, memories of her grandmother's quiet wisdom, the loneliness of growing up without knowing much about her family's origins, and the strange, persistent feeling that she had always been somehow different from everyone else in town. "Do you ever feel as though you are missing a piece of yourself?" Elena asked one evening, as they sat together near her shop after closing, the last light of day filtering softly through the windows. "Something important, just out of reach, that you cannot quite name?" Cade's expression grew thoughtful, his sharp eyes studying her with quiet intensity. "More often than I would like to admit," he said softly, "though lately, I find myself wondering if that missing piece might not be as far from reach as I once believed." Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly under the weight of his gaze, though she did not look away. "You speak in riddles more often than you realize," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Perhaps," Cade admitted, a rare, genuine smile, briefly softening his usually serious expression. "Some truths are difficult to speak plainly, even when the heart already understands them clearly." Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed within the Ashwood pack. Walter observed the change in his king with a mixture of hope and concern, aware that whatever connection was forming between Cade and Elena carried consequences far beyond simple companionship. "You spend more time in town than within your own territory," Walter remarked one evening, finding Cade preparing to leave once more for the edge of the forest. "The pack remains well protected," Cade said, though his tone carried a note of defensiveness. "I have not neglected my duties." "That is not what concerns me," Walter said carefully. "Damon Cole grows bolder with each passing week, testing your borders more frequently than before. If he learns the full depth of your attachment to this woman, he may see it as the perfect opportunity to strike where you are most vulnerable." Cade's expression darkened, though he did not deny the truth in Walter's warning. "I am aware of the risk," he said quietly, "but I cannot bring myself to walk away from her, not when every instinct within me insists she carries answers I have searched for since Leora's passing." Walter studied him for a long moment, his expression softening slightly despite his lingering worry. "Then be prepared," he said finally, "to protect what you have found, no matter the cost it demands." Cade nodded solemnly, the weight of that warning settling heavily over him as he made his way once more toward town, carrying both hope and quiet dread in equal measure. Meanwhile, in a separate corner of the forest, Damon Cole gathered his own advisors within a hidden stone hall, his sharp eyes gleaming with calculated ambition, as he listened to reports of Cade's continued visits to the seamstress's shop. "The great Alpha King grows distracted by a human woman," Damon said, a satisfied smile curling across his face. "Perhaps sooner than expected, the opportunity we have waited for has finally arrived." Victor Lang, standing near the edge of the gathered advisors, allowed a thin smile of his own. "Shall I continue monitoring his movements, Alpha Cole?" "Do more than monitor," Damon said, his voice sharpening with purpose. "Learn everything you can about this woman. If she truly holds such power over Cade's attention, she may prove far more useful to us than either of them realizes." Victor bowed slightly, already turning to carry out his orders, while Damon remained behind, his thoughts already calculating the many ways he might turn Cade's growing vulnerability into an advantage that would finally secure control over Ashwood territory for himself. Back in town, unaware of the storm quietly gathering around her, Elena allowed herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to feel something close to genuine happiness, even as a small, persistent voice in the back of her mind warned her that such peace rarely lasted without consequence. A month passed in this fragile balance, filled with quiet visits and growing trust, until one evening changed everything between them entirely. Elena had stayed later than usual at her shop, finishing an order that needed to be delivered the following morning. By the time she stepped outside, the sky had already darkened completely, the moon casting pale light across the empty street. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself and began the familiar walk home, her thoughts drifting comfortably toward her most recent conversation with Cade, rather than any sense of danger. She was halfway along the forest path when she noticed something small and pale lying near the edge of the trees. Curious, she stepped closer, only to realize it was one of her own scarves, the very first one taken from her so many weeks ago, now lying discarded on the ground as though dropped in haste. Before she could fully process the strange sight, a low growl sounded from the shadows nearby, and the familiar silver-gray wolf emerged, moving with less grace than usual, one of its front legs held slightly off the ground. "You're hurt," Elena said immediately, her earlier caution forgotten entirely as concern took over. The wolf did not retreat this time, allowing her to approach closer than it ever had before. As she knelt down beside it, her hand hovering carefully near its injured leg, something shifted rapidly in the air around them, a strange shimmer of light and shadow that made her gasp and stumble backward. Where the wolf had been only seconds before, Cade now knelt on the ground, his human form marked with a shallow but clearly painful wound along his forearm, his breathing heavier than usual. Elena stared at him, frozen in shock, the pieces of the past weeks finally clicking together with undeniable clarity. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and something closer to betrayal. "You are the wolf. You have been the wolf this entire time." Cade's expression carried no attempt at denial, only quiet resignation as he met her gaze. "Elena," he began carefully, "please, let me explain." "Explain?" Elena's voice rose sharply, years of carefully built composure cracking beneath the weight of this revelation. "You let me believe I was slowly losing my mind, wondering why a wild animal seemed to understand every word I said. You watched me struggle to make sense of everything, all while knowing exactly what was happening the entire time. I did not know how to tell you," Cade said, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight, clearly favoring his injured arm. "I feared how you might react, and more than that, I feared what revealing the full truth might mean for both of us. So instead you decided deception was the safer choice," Elena said, her hurt evident beneath her anger. "Every conversation, every quiet moment we shared, was any of it real, or was I simply another piece in whatever plan you have been carrying out?" "All of it was real," Cade said firmly, pushing himself unsteadily to his feet despite his injury. "Every word, every moment between us, was genuine. I have never once lied about what I feel toward you. Yet you lied about everything else," Elena said, taking a step back despite the ache in her chest at putting distance between them. "How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" Cade's expression grew pained, though he did not attempt to close the distance she had created. "You have every right to your anger," he said quietly. "I should have told you the truth long before it came to this. I let my own fear of losing whatever connection we were building keep me silent far longer than I should have." Elena studied him for a long moment, torn between the hurt of his deception and the genuine remorse evident in his expression. "Why were you hurt tonight?" she asked finally, unable to fully abandon her concern despite everything. "Damon Cole's men grow bolder," Cade admitted. "Tonight, they tested my borders more aggressively than before. I managed to drive them back, though not without cost. Because of me, Elena said quietly, the realization settling heavily over her. Because your attention has been divided, watching over me instead of focusing entirely on your pack's protection. That is not your burden to carry, Cade said firmly. The choices I have made, the risks I have taken, they are mine alone. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the cold night air suddenly feeling far colder than before. I need time, she said finally, her voice quieter now, though still carrying an edge of hurt. Time to understand everything that has happened, without you standing here confusing my thoughts further. Cade nodded slowly, though the pain in his expression suggested her words cut deeper than his physical wound ever could. I understand, he said softly. Take whatever time you need. I will not press you further than you are willing to allow. Elena turned to leave, pausing only briefly to look back at him one final time. Get your injury treated, she said, her voice softer despite herself. Regardless of everything else, I would not wish you further harm. With that, she turned and walked the remaining distance home alone, her mind a chaotic swirl of betrayal, confusion, and an ache she could not fully explain, even to herself. Cade remained standing at the edge of the forest long after she disappeared from sight, the weight of her hurt settling over him far more heavily than the physical wound along his arm. He had known this moment would come eventually, the truth impossible to hide indefinitely, yet knowing it did nothing to soften the pain of watching her walk away, uncertain whether she would ever choose to return. He made his way slowly back toward his lodge, each step heavier than the last, his thoughts consumed entirely by the fear that his months of careful secrecy had finally cost him the one connection he had never expected to find, nor known just how desperately he needed, until the moment it was threatened with being lost entirely. The days following the revelation stretched out slowly, each one heavier than the last. Elena threw herself into her work with a determination that left little room for rest, though her thoughts betrayed her constantly, drifting back again and again to the image of Cade kneeling in the moonlight, human once more, his secret finally laid bare between them. Nora noticed the shift in her friend almost immediately, though this time Elena offered no explanation beyond simple exhaustion, unwilling to share a truth that felt far too strange and complicated to put into words. You have not smiled properly in days, Nora observed one afternoon, watching Elena fold a stack of finished linens with more force than necessary. Whatever happened, it must have been serious. It's complicated, Elena admitted quietly, unwilling to elaborate further. Nora studied her for a long moment before setting a comforting hand on her arm. Whatever it is, I hope you find peace with it soon. You deserve happiness, Elena, not whatever weight you have been carrying lately. Elena managed a small, grateful smile, though the words did little to ease the storm still churning within her. She had considered, more than once during those long, sleepless nights, simply leaving town altogether. Perhaps distance would offer the clarity she desperately needed, a chance to untangle her feelings without the constant pull of Cade's presence looming just beyond the town's edge. Yet each time she seriously entertained the thought, something held her back, an invisible thread she could not quite bring herself to sever, no matter how deeply his deception had wounded her. Cade, for his part, honored her request for distance, though the absence of his visits left her shop feeling strangely emptier than she wanted to admit. She caught herself glancing toward the door more often than usual, half expecting to see his familiar figure step inside, only to be met with disappointment each time a stranger walked through instead. Within the Ashwood pack, tensions continued to rise. Damon Cole's forces grew bolder with each passing week, testing the borders with increasing frequency. Clearly sensing the distraction weighing on their rival king, Walter observed Cade's growing restlessness with quiet concern, noting the way his usual sharp focus seemed dulled by whatever conflict remained unresolved between him and the seamstress in town. You cannot lead effectively while your heart remains fractured, Walter said one evening, finding Cade standing at the edge of his territory, staring out toward the distant lights of town. I am aware of the toll this takes, Cade admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. But I cannot force Elena's forgiveness, nor would I wish to, even if I could. Then perhaps it is time to offer more than silence, Walter suggested. If the truth has already been revealed, perhaps what remains is simply the courage to share the deeper truth behind it. Cade turned to look at his old advisor, a flicker of understanding passing across his tired expression. You believe I should tell her about Leora? I believe, Walter said carefully, that whatever chance remains between you will not survive on partial truths alone. If you wish to earn back her trust, you must be willing to offer everything, not merely the parts that are easiest to share. Cade considered this for a long moment, the weight of his sister's memory settling heavily over him as it always did whenever the subject arose. He had spent years avoiding this particular truth, burying it deep beneath duty and quiet grief, yet he understood now that continuing to hide it would only ensure the widening distance between himself and Elena remained permanent. Meanwhile, Damon Cole's ambitions grew increasingly bold. Having learned through Victor's careful observations of Cade's continued absence from pack matters, he decided the moment had finally arrived to press his advantage more directly. "Send word to the neighboring packs," Damon instructed his advisors, gathered once more within his hidden stone hall. "Announce a formal challenge against Cade Ashwood's leadership. Let all who witness know that his attention has strayed from his duties, weakened by a foolish attachment to a human woman unworthy of his position. A formal challenge carries great risk," one advisor cautioned. "Should Cade successfully defend his position, our own standing among the packs may suffer greatly." "Cade is distracted," Damon said confidently, his focus divided, his instincts dulled by matters of the heart rather than matters of leadership. This is precisely the moment to strike, before he has the chance to fully recover his composure. Victor Lang, standing quietly among the gathered advisors, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, already anticipating the chaos such a challenge would bring, and the opportunities it might create for those clever enough to seize them. Word of the formal challenge reached Cade only a day later, delivered by a messenger wolf from a neutral pack territory, carrying the news with grim urgency. "Damon Cole has announced his intention to challenge your leadership formally," Walter reported, finding Cade within his private chamber. "The gathering will take place within a fortnight, before witnesses from every pack in the region." Cade's expression hardened immediately, years of careful leadership rising quickly to replace the vulnerability of recent weeks. "Then I must prepare accordingly," he said firmly. "Regardless of what personal matters remain unresolved, I will not allow Damon Cole to seize what does not belong to him." "And Elena?" Walter asked carefully. Cade's expression softened only slightly at the mention of her name. "I will find a way to make things right with her," he said quietly. "But first, I must ensure the safety of my pack remains secured. I cannot allow personal matters to compromise what I have sworn to protect." Walter nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of duty that had always defined his king, even as he silently hoped Cade would find the courage to address both battles awaiting him, the one for his throne, and the one for the woman who had somehow become just as vital to his heart as the position he had inherited. That same evening, unaware of the challenge now looming over Cade's future, Elena sat by her window, staring out toward the distant tree line, her heart aching with confusion she could not quite resolve. Despite everything, despite the hurt of his deception, and the uncertainty of what came next, she found herself hoping, quietly and against her better judgment, that whatever remained unresolved between them might still find its way towards something worth holding on to. 3 days after learning of Damon's formal challenge, Cade finally made his way back into town, his resolve steady despite the uncertainty awaiting him. He found Elena closing her shop for the evening, her expression guarded the moment she noticed him approaching. "I did not expect you to return so soon," she said carefully, though she made no move to turn him away. "I know I promised to respect your need for distance," Cade said, his voice quieter than usual, carrying a vulnerability she had rarely witnessed from him before. "But there are things you deserve to know, truths I should have shared long before circumstances forced my hand." Elena studied him for a long moment, noting the unusual weight in his posture, the exhaustion evident beneath his composed exterior. "All right," she said finally, gesturing toward the small bench outside her shop. "I am listening." Cade lowered himself onto the bench beside her, staring out toward the darkening street for several long moments, before finally speaking. "Many years ago," he began, his voice carrying the weight of old grief, "I had a younger sister named Leora." Elena remained silent, sensing the importance of allowing him the space to continue at his own pace. "She was gifted in ways even rare among our kind," Cade continued. "Her connection to scent allowed her to sense danger long before it arrived, to calm troubled hearts, to bring comfort to those suffering in ways medicine alone could never achieve. The pack relied on her greatly, myself most of all." "Walter mentioned something of this," Elena said softly, though he would not share the full story. Cade nodded, unsurprised. It is not a story easily told, even after all these years. He paused, gathering himself before continuing. "When I was still young, before I inherited leadership of the pack, our territory faced a harsh winter, unlike any we had experienced before. Illness spread quickly among our people, and Leora worked tirelessly, day after day, using her gifts to ease the suffering of those affected." Elena watched him carefully, noticing the way his hands clenched slightly against his knees as he continued. "She grew weaker with each person she helped," Cade said, his voice growing quieter still. Her gift came at a cost few understood at the time, drawing from her own strength to heal others. Despite our warnings, despite our pleading with her to rest, she refused to stop, insisting that the pack's survival mattered more than her own well-being. "What happened to her?" Elena asked gently, though some part of her already sensed the answer. "She grew too weak to recover," Cade said, his voice breaking slightly despite his efforts to remain composed. The illness she had spent weeks helping others fight eventually took hold of her own body, and by the time we understood the severity of what was happening, it was already too late to save her. Elena's chest tightened painfully at the raw grief evident in his words. "I am so sorry, Cade." "She was wrapped in a scarf identical to the ones you create," Cade continued quietly. "A gift our mother had made for her many years before, one she wore constantly, as though it offered some measure of comfort during her most difficult days. When she passed, we buried her with it still around her shoulders." Understanding began to dawn slowly across Elena's expression. "The scarves," she whispered. "That is why you took them." Cade nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed emotion. "The first time I caught your scent, carried on the wool of that scarf, something within me recognized a familiarity I had not felt in years. It was not identical to Leora's scent, but close enough to stir a hope I had long since buried, a foolish, desperate hope that perhaps some connection remained between you and the sister I lost." "Is that all I have ever been to you?" Elena asked quietly, unable to keep a note of hurt from creeping into her voice. "A reminder of what you lost?" "No," Cade said firmly, turning to meet her gaze directly. "What began as a search for connection to my sister's memory became something entirely separate, something that has nothing to do with Leora and everything to do with who you are, Elena, independent of any resemblance to my past." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity in his expression, finding none. "Why did you not simply tell me this from the beginning?" "Fear," Cade admitted honestly. "Fear that revealing such a painful personal truth might frighten you away, before you had the chance to know me as more than the wolf who kept stealing your belongings. Fear that admitting my initial fixation stemmed from grief rather than genuine interest might convince you that nothing real existed between us at all." "But something real does exist," Elena said softly, more statement than question. "Something real exists," Cade confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability etched across his features. "More real than I have allowed myself to feel in longer than I care to admit." Elena sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the weight of everything he had shared, the grief behind his earlier deception finally making sense in ways that softened, though did not entirely erase, the hurt she had carried these past weeks. "Thank you," she said finally, "for trusting me with this truth." Cade nodded, relief evident in the slight easing of tension across his shoulders. "There is one more truth I must share," he added carefully, "though this one concerns immediate danger rather than old grief." Elena's expression grew wary once more. "What kind of danger?" "A rival pack leader has issued a formal challenge against my position," Cade admitted. "Damon Cole believes my attention toward you has weakened my leadership, and he intends to use that perceived weakness to seize control of my territory." Elena's stomach twisted uncomfortably at the news. "Because of me. Because of choices I have made," Cade corrected gently. "None of this falls upon your shoulders, Elena. But I felt you deserved to know the full truth of what awaits, rather than remaining unaware of the danger that may follow." Elena reached out, hesitating only briefly, before placing her hand gently over his. "Then let me help however I can," she said firmly. "Whatever this challenge requires, I do not intend to simply stand aside and watch from a distance." Cade turned his hand beneath hers, his fingers curling gently around her palm, a small, grateful smile finally breaking through the weight of his earlier grief. "Your courage," he said softly, "continues to surprise me at every turn." For the first time in weeks, sitting together beneath the darkening evening sky, both of them finally allowed themselves a small measure of peace, the truth between them laid bare at last, even as the looming challenge ahead threatened to test everything they had only just begun to rebuild. In the days that followed, Elena found herself drawn more deeply into the world Cade had spent so long trying to keep separate from her own. With the formal challenge only a week away, the atmosphere within the Ashwood pack grew tense with quiet preparation, and Cade, though reluctant at first, allowed Elena to accompany him briefly into the outer edges of his territory, wanting her to understand more fully the life he led beyond the walls of her small shop. Walter greeted her with cautious respect during her first visit, his sharp eyes studying her carefully, as though searching for confirmation of whatever connection Cade believed existed between her and his long-lost sister. You carry yourself with more strength than I expected, Walter admitted, after observing her calm response to the unfamiliar surroundings of the pack's territory. Leora carried herself much the same way, unwilling to be intimidated by circumstances beyond her control. I hope that is meant as a compliment, Elena said, offering a small smile. It is, Walter confirmed, his expression softening slightly, perhaps more than you realize. As the day of the challenge approached, word spread quickly through town that something significant was happening within the forest, though most residents remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of the conflict brewing among the packs. Nora noticed Elena's continued distraction, though this time, sensing the seriousness behind her friend's silence, she chose not to press for details, offering quiet support instead. 2 days before the scheduled challenge, disaster struck earlier than anyone anticipated. Elena had stayed later than usual at Cade's lodge, discussing final preparations with Walter, while Cade attended to matters elsewhere within the territory, when a sudden commotion erupted outside. Raised voices and hurried footsteps echoed through the stone corridors, and Walter's expression shifted instantly from calm composure to sharp alertness. Stay here, Walter instructed firmly, moving quickly toward the door. Do not leave this room until I return. Elena's heart pounded as she waited, straining to make sense of the muffled voices beyond the thick wooden door. Several tense minutes passed before Walter returned, his expression grim. Damon Cole's forces have moved against our eastern border, Walter said urgently. It appears he does not intend to wait for the formal challenge. He seeks to weaken our position before the gathering even begins. Where is Cade? Elena asked, alarm rising sharply within her chest. Already moving to meet the threat directly, Walter said. I must join him. You will remain here, protected within the lodge, until this matter is resolved. I cannot simply wait here while he faces danger, Elena said, her voice firm despite the fear tightening around her heart. You must, Walter insisted. Your safety matters greatly to him, Elena. Do not add to his burdens by placing yourself at unnecessary risk. Reluctantly, Elena agreed to remain within the lodge, though the following hours passed with agonizing slowness, every distant sound outside sending fresh waves of worry through her entire body. She paced the length of the chamber countless times, praying silently for news, any news, that would confirm Cade's safety. It was well past midnight when Walter finally returned, his expression carrying visible exhaustion though thankfully free of the grim news she had feared most. The border has been secured, Walter reported. Damon's forces retreated once it became clear their surprise advance would not succeed as easily as anticipated. And Cade? Elena asked immediately. He is well, Walter assured her, though not without cost. He insisted on leading the defense personally, refusing to allow others to bear greater risk on his behalf. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. May I see him? Walter studied her for a long moment before nodding. He is resting in the eastern chamber. I believe seeing you would bring him more comfort than anything else at this moment. Elena found Cade seated near a small fire, a bandage wrapped carefully around his shoulder, his expression weary but alert as she entered the room. The moment his eyes met hers, something in his tense posture visibly eased. You should be resting safely elsewhere, Cade said softly, though there was no real reproach in his tone. I could not simply wait without knowing you were safe, Elena said, moving quickly to his side, her hands hovering carefully near his injured shoulder. Walter tells me the border has been secured. For now, Cade confirmed, though Damon's boldness tonight confirms he does not intend to wait patiently for the formal challenge. He grows increasingly desperate to seize control before his own advisors begin questioning his judgment. What happens now? Elena asked, settling carefully beside him. We prepare more diligently than before, Cade said, his exhaustion evident despite the determination in his voice. And we ensure that whatever challenge Damon presents, formally or otherwise, finds us ready, rather than caught unprepared as we nearly were tonight. Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers gently through his own. You are not facing this alone, she said firmly. Whatever happens next, I intend to stand beside you through it, regardless of the risk that entails. Cade turned to study her carefully, something deeply grateful softening his tired expression. I once believed protecting you meant keeping you as far from this world as possible, he admitted quietly. But watching you these past weeks, I understand now that you possess a strength equal to anyone within my own pack, perhaps greater. Then let me use that strength, Elena said softly, rather than standing uselessly aside while you carry this burden entirely on your own shoulders. Cade lifted her hand gently, pressing a soft, grateful kiss against her knuckles, the gesture carrying more warmth and sincerity than words alone could have conveyed. Together then, he said quietly, whatever challenges tomorrow brings. Outside, the forest remained quiet once more, the immediate danger temporarily subdued, though both of them understood clearly that the true test of everything they had built together still awaited, drawing steadily closer with each passing hour, until the moment finally arrived when Cade's leadership and the bond they had forged despite every obstacle would be tested before the eyes of every pack in the region. The day of the formal challenge arrived beneath a clear, cold sky, the kind of stillness that seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Representatives from packs across the region gathered within a wide, ancient clearing deep in the forest, a place reserved for matters too significant to be settled anywhere else. Elena stood near the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding as she watched Cade take his position at the center, his posture steady and unwavering despite the enormity of what awaited him. Damon Cole arrived shortly after, flanked by Victor Lang and several other advisors, his confident smile doing little to mask the calculated ambition burning behind his eyes. "Alpha King Ashwood," Damon greeted, his tone dripping with false respect. "I trust you are prepared to defend your position today." "I am," Cade replied evenly, his voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "Though I question whether your challenge stems from genuine concern for these lands, or simple ambition, dressed carefully in false justification." A ripple of murmurs passed through the gathered witnesses at his direct accusation, though Damon's expression remained carefully composed. "My concern is genuine," Damon said smoothly. "A king distracted by matters of the heart cannot properly protect the territories entrusted to his care. I merely offer stronger leadership in a time that demands it." "Then let the witnesses judge for themselves," Cade said calmly, "whether my leadership has faltered, or whether ambition alone drives your challenge today." The formal proceedings began, each side presenting their case before the assembled representatives. Damon spoke at length about Cade's recent absences from pack matters, his visits to town, the vulnerability such distractions supposedly created. Cade, in turn, spoke of the successful defense of his borders, the continued strength and loyalty of his people, and the unwavering commitment he held toward protecting everything his family had built across generations. As the debate continued, Elena watched nervously from the sidelines, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, until finally, one of the eldest representatives among the gathered packs raised a hand for silence. "Alpha Cole," the elder said, his voice carrying quiet authority despite his advanced age. "You claim weakness within Cade's leadership, yet reports from the eastern border suggest it was your own forces who attempted an unprovoked advance, mere days before this very gathering. Explain this contradiction." Damon's confident expression faltered slightly, clearly caught off guard by the elder's knowledge of the incident. "A simple border patrol," Damon said quickly, "nothing more." "A border patrol that resulted in armed confrontation," the elder countered sharply, "hardly qualifies as simple. It appears, Alpha Cole, that your own ambition may have driven aggressive action rather than any genuine failing on Cade Ashwood's part." Murmurs of agreement spread through the gathered witnesses, and Elena felt a small flicker of hope ignite within her chest as the tide of the discussion began shifting visibly against Damon's favor. Sensing his position weakening, Damon's composure cracked further, frustration seeping into his voice. "Regardless of recent events," he said sharply, "the fact remains that Cade's attention has been divided by an unworthy attachment to a mere human woman, one with no place among matters concerning pack leadership." At this, Elena stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer despite the surprised murmurs that followed her sudden movement. "If my presence here offends anyone," Elena said, her voice steady despite the intense attention suddenly focused upon her, "then let me speak for myself, rather than being spoken about as though I hold no voice of my own." Cade turned toward her, surprise and quiet pride mingling across his expression, though he said nothing, allowing her the space to continue. "I did not seek out this world," Elena continued, addressing the gathered representatives directly. "But in the weeks since becoming part of it, I have witnessed nothing but genuine dedication from Cade Ashwood toward the safety and well-being of his people. Whatever personal connection exists between us has never once compromised his commitment to his duties. If anything, it has strengthened his resolve to protect everything and everyone under his care, myself included." The elder representative studied her carefully for a long moment before turning back toward Damon. "It appears, Alpha Cole, that your challenge rests upon assumptions rather than genuine evidence of failing leadership. Unless you possess further proof beyond mere speculation, this gathering finds no just cause to strip Cade Ashwood of his rightful position." Damon's jaw tightened with barely restrained frustration, his gaze flickering briefly toward Victor before he forced his expression back into careful neutrality. "I withdraw my challenge," he said stiffly. the words clearly costing him great effort. For now. As Damon and his advisors retreated from the clearing, the gathered witnesses began dispersing gradually, quiet conversations rippling through the crowd, regarding the surprising turn of events. Cade remained standing at the center of the clearing, his gaze finding Elena immediately, gratitude and relief evident across his features. "You did not need to speak," Cade said softly, once the clearing had mostly emptied, "though I am endlessly grateful that you chose to." "I told you," Elena said, a small, warm smile touching her lips, "I would not stand aside while you faced this challenge alone." Walter approached them both, his usual guarded expression softened considerably by evident relief. "The pack owes you a debt of gratitude," he said, addressing Elena directly. "Your words today carried more weight than perhaps even you realize." "I only spoke the truth," Elena said simply. "Sometimes," Walter said, a rare smile crossing his weathered features, "the truth is exactly what is needed most." That evening, as the last light of day faded gently over the Ashwood territory, Cade and Elena walked together along the familiar forest path, the tension of recent weeks finally beginning to ease into something calmer, steadier. "What happens now?" Elena asked, glancing toward him as they walked. "Now," Cade said, reaching into his coat and withdrawing a familiar piece of soft gray wool, the very first scarf he had ever taken from her so many weeks before. "I believe it is time I returned what rightfully belongs to you." Elena took the scarf gently, running her fingers over the familiar fabric, memories of that first strange encounter flooding back with surprising fondness rather than fear. "You kept it all this time?" "I could not bring myself to part with it," Cade admitted quietly, "though I understand now that what I truly needed was never simply the scarf itself, but the woman who made it." Elena stepped closer, wrapping the scarf gently around his shoulders instead of her own, a soft smile brightening her expression. "Then perhaps it is time this scarf found a new purpose," she said warmly, "not as something taken in secret, but as something freely given." Cade's expression softened into something deeply tender as he reached up to touch the fabric now resting against his own shoulders, the symbolism of the gesture settling comfortably between them both. "Freely given," he echoed softly, "and gladly received." Together beneath the darkening evening sky, with the immediate danger finally behind them and a future full of quiet possibility stretching ahead, Cade and Elena continued their walk deeper into the territory that would, from this day forward, belong to them both equally, each carrying forward not just the weight of duty and grief, but the steady, unshakable warmth of a bond neither of them intended to ever let go.